Welcome to Foolproof Theology. It's great to be with you here today. I am Chase Davis, and I'm your host. Hey, today on the show, we've got a special guest. I've been keeping track of his story, what's been going up in Moscow. I've been corrected multiple times. It's not Moscow, it's Moscow, Idaho. We've got Gabe Rench on the show. Gabe, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Man, Chase, thank you for having me.
Hey, you've got a fascinating story. Just so my audience knows, you are a co-founder of Fight Laugh Feast, founder of the Fight Laugh Feast conference, which happens, it looks like a great party every year that I wish I could go to. You're also part of Patriots for Idaho.
Yes.
So you got a lot of great things going on. Tell me a little bit about Fight Laugh Feast. If my audience isn't familiar, what is Fight Laugh Feast? What is it all about?
So our show, the show that preceded Fight Laugh Feast is Cross Politic, crosspolitic.com. Jesus is Lord over politics. We started in 2016, and we started basically because we believed that the church needed to do a better job preaching and discipling the church and how to apply the gospel to politics and culture. And out of that grew kind of the Fight Laugh Feast network and conference. And so our tagline in Cross Politic was Fight Laugh Feast. We believe Christians need to learn how to fight better, not just with sin and the devil, but with each other. Iron sharpens iron. Laughter. The joy of the Lord is our strength. Again, I say rejoice. Christians are commanded. That's one of the bedrocks of what it means to be a Christian. We rejoice no matter what. And feasting. God prepares a table in the presence of our enemies, and we thought Christians. Those are kind of three things that Christians really need to embody, given our current culture and time, and something that we haven't done well as the church. So that's where our tagline came from: Fight, Laugh, Feast. And we turned that into a conference called the Fight Laugh Feast Conference. And, we know the nomenclature is very odd and intriguing in a lot of ways. But we wanted to name, our conferences we did a conference on the politics of sex. We've done a conference on the politics of, this next conference in October is on the politics of six-day creation. We did a conference called Love God, Sing Psalms, Defy Tyrants. So our conference topics are also pretty heavy. It's not, I love the holiness of God and worship and sovereignty of God kind of conferences, but we wanted to do something that was more blue collar theology to the common church member who, needed these topics are gritty and they're heavy, and we need discipleship on how sex applies to politics and how, what it means to love God and to fight tyrants, what it means, what's the politics of six-day creation, why does six-day creation matter? So and we know that probably discourages some conferences from signing up to our conference because politics of creation or politics of sex, what? So that's, our conferences are pretty, they're a lot of fun. We actually kick them off with beer and psalms on opening night. That's all we do is beer and psalms and fellowship. It's a lot of fun. They're family oriented. We get a jumpy castle for the kids. It's a riot. It's hilarious. And this year it's at the Ark Encounter. So you have like the Ark, you have a petting zoo, you have camel rides, and then you have the conference going on. So really, really fun time. And we're trying to adjust the way people think about conferences, because conferences have kind of been a place where things kind of get stale a little bit, and we're doing the same kind of repetitive topics over and over: holiness of God, worship, sovereignty of God. All those things obviously are good topics and important, but we want to change conferences into kind of a weekend of celebration, a 3-day party plus topics and everything. So we're very unique in our approach, and that's all kind of grown out of just who we are as me and the host and my other host on the show. That's kind of our personalities a little bit too. So there you go.
Yeah, it sounds like a fun time, man. I wish I could make it out this year. I know you got Michael Foster. I think, is Doug Wilson coming out too to the Ark Encounter? Okay, great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're a listener and you haven't listened to Cross Politic before, I really enjoy it, especially because they're not afraid to really dialogue with people they may disagree with on some matters. They invite them on the show. Let's talk about it. I love that kind of attitude, and I love what they're kind of bringing to it. If you go to our church, the Well Church, we have the same kind of temperament. We want to let's take the hottest topics that we're wondering about, that we're thinking about, but apparently we're not supposed to talk about. Let's talk about them. Let's open up the scriptures and examine what God has to say. So great stuff over there. You can go over to Cross Politics website, go to their show, listen to it, and it should equip you really well. One of the things that the main reason I wanted to get you on the show is because what you've experienced in Moscow with the COVID restrictions, singing psalms and stuff going on. If you're living anywhere in the world in the last 3 years, you know that there were draconian restrictions placed on our lives that were shocking. Thankfully, in Colorado, there was an exemption for me as a minister to where I could travel around wherever I wanted. There wasn't a
Wow.
mask exemption, so I still was required by law to do that. And however well I obeyed that
Wow.
law, you might have noticed in person. But I definitely took advantage of that. So I wanted to hear from you, though, on the ground. It's 2020. Gabe Rench is there in Moscow, Idaho. COVID hits. How long did it take you to kind of go, this is crazy, and this
Yeah.
is tyranny,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to do something about it? What was it like 2 months? What was it for you?
Yeah. Good question. So, in actually January of 2020, we were on the road. We went to G3 conference. We spoke at G3 conference, and then did this East Coast tour. When that happened, I started hearing about COVID. What is COVID? News reports started coming about this flu or this, virus out of Wuhan lab or whatever, or out of China, and that was in 2020. And I remember Trump shutting down international flights from Wuhan to these states, and was called a racist for doing it and so forth. And then March came around, and on March 20th, so I live in Idaho, which is a red state, but I live in a blue dot. And my blue dot is crazy. I moved to University of Idaho. I remember I moved to Moscow, Idaho in 2002 to attend University of Idaho, which is the college town. And so I live in a college town surrounded by farm fields. Literally, that's what it is. A very small town surrounded by farm fields. And so our city council's liberal, our mayor's liberal, the town's liberal, and our mayor shut down downtown, required business at the threat of the police interaction. At threat of the police, he shut down downtown, couldn't open businesses, and that was in March, I think 20th or 25th. My dates get a little old now, and without one case of COVID in town. So he shut down everything, and then the dude would go 5 miles outside of town and play golf and drink beer with his buddies. It was pretty wicked.
Yeah.
And then so Cross Politic, we actually, I never thought I'd read a research paper on masking, on the efficacy of masking. But we saw churches start shutting down, and we saw governors and city council and we saw all these things start shutting down, and we're like, oh my goodness. And so we got into the literature, and me and Knox and Toby just started reading research studies, reading data and stuff I never would have imagined. And so I think pretty quickly, well, I would say our biblical principles knew immediately what to do.
Okay.
Our biblical principles knew that the government doesn't have authority to tell families to stop providing, doesn't have authority to tell the husband to stop providing for the family. So we knew the government couldn't do that. So we had certain kind of, sphere sovereignty principles that were already guiding us. We're theonomists, so we have we believe God's law with good and necessary consequence applies to today, as Westminster Confession would put it. And so we had principles guiding us. But then in terms of like the data and like the narrative and the story, I think we figured it out pretty quick in March, but didn't fully know and figure out everything until we kind of process it in April, May. And our church, when the mayor shut everything down, the governor of our state also shut everything down too, and the governor shut down churches actually in his emergency order, which me and my friend sued, and he later lifted because of our lawsuit. But so our church's response was, yeah, you guys don't really have the authority to do what you do, but we do believe that the church has, that the civil government has emergency, I wouldn't even say authority, but emergency measures that they can be involved in when, catastrophes happen. So we stayed home from church for 3 weeks, deferring. The last week we almost went back to church, but we wanted to give the government an emergency room to breathe and to make some decisions. In the same way, analogous scenario where it's like if your church building's on fire and the civil government comes in and says, "Get out! The building's on fire," we wouldn't sit there and say, "You don't have the authority to tell us to get out," right?
Right. Yeah.
But and so we'd all cooperate and get out. But now there's the one difference there is that we all agree that there's an emergency situation happening, and that with the church being on fire, you can see it and you can agree to it. So that's kind of the principle that our church elders were operating off of when we initially stayed home from church for 3 weeks, and then after that we went back to church, which was a real problem for our city and everything. And we ended up writing a letter to the mayor saying, "Hey, we're going back to church." I think it's 4 weeks, 5 weeks, something into it. Hey, we're going in person. But that same Sunday they released the order. I don't know if it's because of our pastor's letter or not or whatever, but so that's kind of the condition of it. The situation, it was liberal. They shut down downtown business and everything. And then in July, and in our church, the way we protest in town, this is important, we would go sing psalms and hymns in downtown and for 20, 25 minutes and then leave. That's how we protest. Not wearing a mask, not standing 6 feet apart, all that stuff. And of course that caused a lot of liberals in town were blaming us for the virus and all this. You guys aren't loving your community. You're creating viral spread and just all these unfounded claims. And July 2nd, the Moscow City Council put in a health emergency order, extended it basically, that required everyone who's outside to wear a mask if you can't stand 6 feet apart. No scientific backing about the 6-foot rule. And the masking, all the historical literature up to that point, or up to really March 2020, said that masking does not work for the general population during pandemics. All the science, you read the 30 years of scientific literature, which we went through a lot of it, said masking don't work for the general public, but they required masking. So we again go protest, sing psalms. Black Lives Matter would come through, and they did their thing. They weren't violent in our town, but they came through and did their protests in downtown. Some of them not wearing a mask, some of them not standing 6 feet apart. Nothing happened. But we every month would keep doing this. Our city council would meet every 30 days to extend the health order, and then so July, August, come September, every 30 days the city council would meet and extend it. So finally, come September 20th, the city council extended it, and then our elders are like, "Well, let's go sing psalm on Wednesday," and that's September 23rd. So we went this time, instead of going to downtown, we went to the city hall parking lot. So kind of, be a little more, hey, you guys need to hear us here. So we went out there. I'll never forget this. This is the craziest thing that I think I've heard. There's so many levels of ludicrousy in what happened here. So we show up, we'd go after work at 5 o'clock. If people, especially husbands, would get off work and go. Wives and children were also there too. We went to the parking lot. When we got to the parking lot of City Hall, they had spray painted polka dots every 6 feet apart on the ground, so they could objectively see that we were standing 6 feet apart.
Dude.
Yeah, I remember looking at the parking lot and thinking, "Oh, someone was playing like hopscotch, or what was going on here?"
Sure.
Like some games were going on. It's so weird. They cleared out all the cars from the parking lot. They'd spray painted polka dots all over, and I'm like, "What is going on?" And I look next to City Hall, and there's like 7 cops standing against the building of City Hall. And I was like, okay, we'd never seen that before at our protest. And then the whole congregation gathered. No one was standing 6 feet apart, and the polka dots. It was just hilarious. The cops told my pastor relayed the message saying, "Hey, if you aren't wearing a mask and you aren't standing 6 feet apart, the cops will probably cite you and arrest you, possibly arrest you." And so it was a beautiful moment. Wives, women, children, husbands, men, no one found a dot. No one found a polka dot, right? No one stood 6 feet apart when Pastor Wilson said that. So we just started singing. I remember we started singing Psalm 20. As the officers walk up to my mom first, because we were just kind of closer to the building. Officers walk up to my mom first, and I think they did it because she's a woman, and they're cowards, basically. Easy place to start. And then my mom says, well, I'm standing next to my son, and COVID doesn't jump from family to family, mom to son. So we were legal. And so when I saw that kind of go down, I was like, I put my arm around my buddy Tyler, and I was like, this is my friend, Tyler. And what I should have done is like, this is my brother in Christ, Tyler.
Exactly.
So I should have done. And so the officer comes to me and says, give me your driver's license. I said, I'm exercising my First Amendment rights. I don't have to. And he said, give me your driver's license. I said, officer, you're violating your oath of office. You should be defending my constitutional rights against the mayor. It's the other way around here, buddy. So we kind of went around about 4 times, and he said, this is the last time I'm asking you. Of course, he wouldn't answer any of my questions because he had no answer. And so he said, this is the last time I'm asking you, and he asked me for my license again. And then I said, I'm not giving it to you. And he proceeded to arrest me and handcuff me. The most crazy thing about this moment is they had to take my hymn book out of my hand to arrest me. And what was glorious, we're singing Psalm 20. If any of your listeners know Psalm 20, some trust in chariots, some trust in horses, but we trust in the Lord our God. Beautiful background music to contrast the officers and what was going on. So they hauled me off to jail, but they couldn't find the keys to the cop car that they're trying to get me into. So it took them like 5 minutes. And by then my pastor walked up, Pastor Toby, and started rebuking the officers. My brother walked up and started rebuking the officers, created a whole great moment. I was just, having my pastor back me up in that moment was really amazing.
Yeah.
President Trump ended up retweeting my arrest. I mean, it blew up. We did a show that night after I got out of jail that went all over the place, a cross politics show. And so that happened. And then, I had a criminal complaint against me. I won the criminal complaint in January because they were wrong, obviously. And then I went to a 3-year lawsuit in 1983 claim against my city for violating my First and Fourth Amendment rights, which I just won in June 2nd, earlier in June, and finalized in July. And so that's the gist of the story. A lot more details we could talk about, but I'll go and pause there.
Yeah, that's great, man. So many just great moments in there. And I just want to highlight, if you're listening or watching, think back where you were and the kind of process of you, whether I'm assuming none of my listeners are still wearing a mask. Maybe someone in Boulder is snooping on the channel or something like that. But I remember back in May was when I kind of had the conviction. I had done some similar research just on my own. But then, BLM pops with the death of George Floyd. And so our church has to do kind of a reckoning with things we have taught. And I dove into the literature there. But in summer 2020, we were regathering. We didn't have a building or anything. So we're meeting in a parking lot of a local church on Sundays. I'm preaching out of the bed of my truck, which felt very true to my roots, being from Texas. And we did baptisms out there. But you're talking by September, things had kind of sorted themselves out. That's when I started. If you're a listener, you might know I wrote a couple of articles showing about the problems with masks and all this kind of stuff over at Mere Orthodoxy. You can go find that, and why we should resist and slay. I think I called it the public health Leviathan, why we need to slay it. And so you can find all that out there. But we're on kind of our own track in Boulder, being really blue. The county's blue. The sheriff himself went and raided a local restaurant, took all their supplies, shut them down up in Lyons. And so it was they were very eager to enforce these measures. And so I think this story, it encourages me because I want to be a pastor like Toby. I want to have a church where we are able to do this in unity together. It sounds like y'all were intentionally, you knew when you were doing these psalm sings once a month, these were protests. Is that how y'all approached them in your minds?
Yeah. They were church gatherings and a protest, but you really you can't distinguish really between a church gathering and a protest in that sense, because that's what the First Amendment right protects. It protects free speech, the right to assemble, the right to worship. It basically embodies the First Amendment. And so we were worshiping God. We were raising our hands to God. When they handcuffed me, I couldn't raise my hands to God anymore. They were violating my ability to physically worship. And so we kind of were embodying the whole First Amendment, which was, I think, actually it was really a checkmate move. Worship to free speech, to right to petition your politicians, and right to assemble.
Yeah. Now, there's another episode, and I don't think you're connected with this, but I kept track of this whole thing called Stickergate in Moscow. I think this
Mm,
is a very fascinating story. Basically,
mm-hmm.
from what I recall, some high school age students, kids um, who are part of the church or your church or another church in
Yeah.
town put up stickers. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and they were hilarious, by the way, hilarious stickers,
Yes. Yep.
just kind of like protesting. I think it had the
Mm-hmm.
communist hammer and sickle
Mm-hmm.
on it, and
Mm-hmm.
mask because you care, because
Mm-hmm.
we care, or something like that. And they were putting them up, and they
Mm-hmm.
got arrested for putting these stickers up all
Mm-hmm.
over town. And as far as we
Yeah.
know, that's like the first instance of anyone getting arrested for doing that, because all people put
Mm-hmm.
stickers all over the place. Is that kind of what
Yeah.
happened there?
So, as my buddy Nate Wilson, his sons, Nate printed up the stickers that says Soviet Moscow, enforced because we care. That enforced with a hammer and sickle in the middle, and that saying, that slogan, enforced because we care, was literally the city's marketing campaign for getting people to wear masks. Enforced because we care. So Nate printed up a bunch, and so those were all printed up in protest of my arrest. And so Nate's sons, one morning you can Google Stickergate, literally, at 3 in the morning, got up and went and just tagged a bunch of city poles and friendly businesses with the stickers. Well, the cops come, six cops, I believe, 5 cop cars, 6 cops come at 3 in the morning, handcuff the 18-year-old, and detain and handcuff the 18-year-old and question the 14-year-old without a lawyer present or a dad present. I mean, just super egregious move there. And that's at 3 in the morning. They call dad. Dad comes down and gets them, and then 3 days later, the prosecutor made the cops go back and cite them with 13 tickets. So they knew they were going to lose to my case, and so the prosecutor decided to pick a fight and try to find a victory over here with the sticker gate case. Um, and so there's all sorts of hypocrisy. So, I mean, so the citations that they got were under a marketing and advertisement ban of posting like yard sale signs on city poles. We live in a college town. There's thousands of stickers posted on poles, free speech stickers, what they'd be called, not advertising, promotion, yard signs kind of thing. And thousands. In fact, when the cops took pictures, as evidence. Here's one of the stickers and everything, and so when Nate got kind of the evidence of what the cops had captured in this whole thing, there's literally one picture with a sticker, hammer and sickle sticker on the pole, and right above that was a yard sale sign. Name, address,
No
phone number.
way.
Yeah, literally. You could go over to their house and cite them for this. You got the phone
Yeah.
number, you got the address. You could, and so the city ordinance had never been used in like its 50-year history against anybody in town, and so they were going after because they're going to lose to me, going after Nate's kids on this, and so the cops hid video evidence for a year. They lied about the audio, said the audio and video of the night that of the handcuff and detainment happened, that all the audio and video failed. The cops lied about that for a year. Finally, it came out that they lied. In my case, a month before I was arrested, beginning of September, the mayor was officiating an outdoor wedding. No, not wearing a mask, not social distancing. I mean, just the hypocrisy. I think the best way I can explain this is that we really do live in a town that's run by a liberal cult. Like, they make all these rules, and they largely apply it to the Christians in town. I mean, like, there literally is two different zoning codes. There's two different, masking ordinances. One for the peons, one for the Christian community, and the other one for the mayor. We had video evidence, picture evidence of, city council going to parties and not wearing masks, not social distancing. We had, the wedding. We had all this hypocritical evidence, and then of course you get into Stickergate. Like, no one else was arrested or cited for a ticket, and by arrest I mean he was handcuffed on site. He wasn't taken to jail, but he was arrested. And you handcuff him, and what is that? you know,
Yeah.
um, so there was so much hypocrisy going on. But we've been. I moved to town, like I said, in 2002 to go to University of Idaho, and there's basically Jim Crow laws that only apply to Christians in town, or
Yeah.
at least that's how they play the game. Is they have zoning codes and regulations that they either make up or they interpret the law that only applies to Christians in town. It's insanity.
That's crazy. Yeah, I want to go back to kind of the day you got arrested. You get put in, I guess, a city jail. Is that right?
Yeah. So that night, I I walked. My studio was close by. I had a meeting about an hour before the psalm singing, so I walked to the psalm sing, and then they put me in the county jail. That's our only jail we have in town is county jail.
Okay.
So they put me in the county jail, and because our sheriff is a godly man, um, and gets the issues, and he got me out of jail without bond. He's like, get this guy out of my jail. I don't want him in there. And so I was released that night because
That's
of
great.
him.
Yeah.
And so I got released, and literally, Chocolate Knox calls me as I'm walking out of jail, and he's like, "Get into the studio. We're gonna do a show now. We're going live." And so we went to the studio, did a show. Man, that thing blew up. It went all over the place. It's actually a really good show and kind of details the initial reaction that we had to what just happened.
Sure.
And the whole video went viral. I mean, I heard from people all over the world. I heard from a pastor, missionary, who said, I saw this happen and I thought it was Moscow, Russia, and then did my research and realized it's Moscow, Idaho.
Yeah.
Never in my wildest dreams would I thought Christians would be persecuted in the United States, and it was pretty crazy moment.
Yeah. So when you get arrested, just as I think about possibilities for my life in the future and where the country's going, get me into the spiritual emotional state when you're in the cop car going to jail. Are you anxious, worried? Are you laughing? What's kind of your disposition, and where are you finding hope when you're going to jail being unjustly arrested like this?
The Bible calls us to be joyful warriors, and especially when you're persecuted, be joyful. Especially when wrong is happening to you, be joyful. It's a 3-minute cop ride from where I was arrested to the county jail. Not very long, maybe 5 minutes. And so I just took the whole time. I would love to see if there's video footage of this. I would love to see the video footage of me I just preached at the cop. I was like, "Officer, you're wrong. You're going to answer to God for this." Like I just started going off on him, and I would love to hear. I can't remember exactly all what I said. I'd probably be surprised about some of the things I did say, but would love to hear the footage of what happened. But I just remember like preaching to him and telling him, you're violating your own oath of office and so forth. And then we get to jail, and another friend and his wife were arrested along with me. And so we're just singing like hymns in jail and psalms in jail and just kind of having fun. And they don't know how to treat us. I had one officer come up to me on the other side of the jail cell and say, "Hey man, basically he's like, I agree with you." And I was like, then get me out of here. Like this
Right.
is. So I started getting on him. It was like, "Hey man, we're doing our best," that kind of thing. What was funny, I should have, as I'm leaving jail, there's two officers just hanging out with no mask, not social distancing. And I should have and I pointed out, I was like, "Hey, how come you guys aren't, I just got arrested for not wearing a mask and you're standing, how come you guys aren't?" And I should have just snapped a picture. Bing! And I didn't, and I didn't think of it, but there you go.
That is funny. That's good stuff, man. So did you got these charges against you dropped, but then did you sue? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah.
Back in June, you won the
Yeah.
case. In July, it became final. Did you sue the cops, or what? Who did you
Yeah.
sue,
Yeah.
or what happened there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my criminal complaint I won in January of 2021. So that was about 4 months of fighting the criminal complaint. I won in January 2021, and that whole process was a joke too. I could talk about that later. But after I won my criminal complaint, I reached out to my officers. Me and my wife had talked about it, and we didn't want to sue our cops. No one wants to sue their chief of police and the arresting officers. They're largely there because the mayor made them be there. And then they're the ones who got caught in the pickle. And so I met with my chief of police afterwards. He's gracious enough to set up a meeting after my criminal complaint got dropped. And I just told him, and I met with my arresting officer a week later, and I just told him, I was like, "Hey man, I'm meeting with you guys because I don't want to sue you guys. Like, I just love to have some good answers here. And I asked my chief of police, what do you think about the First Amendment, your oath of office, my arrest? And he didn't really answer anything very well in that conversation. And so I remember walking out of that meeting, calling my wife. I was like, man, I think I need to sue my chief. Like these aren't good conversations I'm having. I'm not getting any confidence that anyone's learning from this. And then a week later, I met with my arresting officer, and it was even worse. He said in the meeting with him, he said, if I had to do it all over again, I'd arrest you again. And I was like, what? That was what? So I was like, I walked out of the office, called my wife, said, hey, I think we got to sue the cops too. And so we sued the city supervisor, the city attorneys, and the arresting officers. All of the arresting officers that were involved, there's like 3 of them, I believe. And then the chief was the 4th. All the 3 officers that were involved either retired or left the police force because of this incident.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. The chief police still there. He's a Christian. I hope to, reestablish a relationship with him through all this. I have no bitterness at all in all this. I think he made a massive blunder with his oath of office and violated his oath of office. And I think he needs to be held accountable for that. But, justice and personal relationships are, 2 distinct things. And so I'd like to, and I'm going to meet with them after all this. I'd love to, reestablish that relationship and see if we can kind of grow as a community from there. But we'll see what happens there. So I think that also applies to just being a joyful warrior in all this is you go through moments like this where, let's say, you are protesting, you get wrongfully arrested, your constitutional rights get violated. You want to be joyful through that whole process. You want to be faithful through that whole process, but you also, you forgive, but that doesn't mean you don't fight for justice. You forgive, but that doesn't mean you don't, trust him anymore. Right. You don't have to trust. I don't really trust my chief right now.
Sure.
So I think that the fight, I think it's important that Christians oftentimes think like, oh, I shouldn't push things further because I need to love my community, or I need to, I don't want to be a Christian that maybe gets my community mad at me, or make people think ill of me, or all these things. And honestly, you need to do what's right, and what the Bible, seek justice the way Bible would want you to seek justice. So Paul appealed to Rome. We don't, as Christians, we don't have a problem appealing to the legal system for justice. The civil government's there for that. And so I sued, like I said, the city supervisor, the prosecuting attorneys, and the cops that were involved. And it was a 3-year battle. Thomas More Society backed me. They were fantastic in all this. Thank God for them, because I didn't have the money to do it. It's almost a 4-year battle. September 20, to now. I just won. Basically, all the papers were signed last week, I think, in July. So it was a long battle. Thomas More Society was fantastic. We won. These are 1983 claims, and so they're all over the map on, but so if people, Christians, a lot of people ask me, what do you think actually true justice is and all this? And I would say true justice is some form of restitution. They wronged me, some sort of punitive damage, which you see in Scripture. And then I think everyone who violated their oath of office should step down or be fired.
Sure.
So that's what justice in my mind should have looked like. And so, but in the courts, the only thing you're allowed to negotiate is some sort of punitive and restitution damage. That's it. And even these 1983 claims, it's hard to argue those because the court system's silly. So we end up winning. We got $300,000, $150,000 from Thomas More Society, and then $50,000 each to us. But even in all this, I have to pay taxes on that money. The government wrongs me. They violate my First Amendment rights. Then they pay me restitution, and then I got to pay them back taxes. It's insanity.
That is crazy.
It blew my mind. So so I am, and all those, I'll say all those my community, the leftists in my community hate me. Uh, there's so many people online. If you go read the social media threads, they're like, take the money and get out of here.
Sure.
They still think I'm wrong. They actually still think I'm wrong.
Right.
They think, yeah, I even got the charge this last 2 weeks of like, you weren't loving your community, you were spreading the virus and all these unfounded claims, you weren't loving and so forth. But actually, that was one of the best ways I could love my family, is bring some sort of justice out of it, and love not my family, not just my family, but my community, is actually seek justice. Because now the city council is going to better the mayor, the cops, everybody in town now is going to better respect everybody's First Amendment rights.
Right.
And so when you fight well and faithfully, you actually fight back evil. You fight back tyranny, small t tyranny in my town. You fight back tyranny that actually blesses the whole community. And they can't see the fact that I'm actually loving them by checking the small tyranny that happened in our town and the disrespect for our nation's constitution.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I think a lot of, and especially in our day and age, a lot of the way that we live out the Bible and the ethics of Christ and obey God's law, a lot of people interpret it as hateful. And when in fact it's the complete opposite. We're loving people by telling them the truth about sexuality and all these kind of things. So I think that's a really, really good point. How, kind of closing out here, when you think about interacting in your town, there's kind of a movement right now with a lot of shuffling of the deck, so to speak. You got people fleeing California, fleeing Washington State,
Yeah.
reasonably so in many cases. But you're committed there. You had people tell you to kind of leave town. How do you not just become super jaded, cynical, and bitter on the people you're talking about meeting? That's super bold to meet with the chief of police, meet with your arresting officer, try to extend kind of some reconciliation there. I think if I'm being honest with kind of the people in my church and other Christians I know, we kind of live, it seems, a bit naive on the power structures and how people are. These people have their own text groups and their emails, and they're saying their own things.
Yeah.
And it becomes almost overwhelming when you think about the powers in your town that are so leftist. How do you not just become like even more just brazen with either attacking them or something like that? How do you process all that?
I mean, there's a couple things that are going on just in terms of my faith in Christ. If God saved me from my sins, how much easier is it going to be for him to save the liberals from their sins? And that salvation is going to work its way out in town. That's the promise of Christ. That's the promised victory of going and discipling all the nations and pouring out the Holy Spirit on the church, that in the end Jesus wins. And so now I might think that this is a bad moment for our community, which it was, and that this makes it hard to see what victory looks like or how Jesus is going to conquer our town. But this goes also to my post-mill theology. I know that Jesus wins, that things get better, that the gospel works, and that it changes people's lives. So I have a future hope of salvation for my city and for my state and for America. And so that's kind of a post-mill soteriology in the background in all this. The other thing that's going on is, I mean, our town's liberal, it's bad, it's not good. I mean, they're doing all sorts of green energy, silly local city stuff, and they're acquiescing to federal government in all sorts of ways they shouldn't be. So there was really an ignorance and lack of thoughtful civic leadership there and everything. And it's right now, I mean, I don't know, we can't win elections. Like conservatives, not just Christians, but conservatives in Moscow can't win elections right now. We're losing our city council elections. They're getting 60% of the vote. We're getting 30%. I mean, that's basically rough numbers what it is. So we have a long ways to go. But I have, I know, Charles, I think it was Spurgeon who said, if I knew that Jesus was coming back tomorrow, I'd still plant a tree today. In other words, I need to be faithful and confident in Christ and go about doing my duties today, regardless of what's going to happen tomorrow, whether Jesus returns or not. And so I have the confidence in Christ, and I just, I know that there's duties that God has placed before me. My work with Cross Politics, my work with, I run a PR agency. I started Patriots for Idaho. I just have all these things and I just go and do it, and let the chips fall where they may. I mean, and nowhere in my wildest imagination did I ever think I'd be arrested for singing psalms, protesting, not standing 6 feet apart. You know, you tell me that story 20 years earlier. Hey, Gabe, I'm gonna prophesy in your life. You're gonna be arrested for singing psalms and not standing 6 feet apart from your friend Tyler. Like, you're making it up. No
Yeah,
way. You're a
you're
false
high, man.
prophet. You're a false prophet. You know what the Bible does with false prophets?
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
and so, you be faithful and let God work through in you and through you, at whatever moment He presents in your life. And so, I I have the confidence that we're going to win. I believe Moscow is going to become more Christian over the next 50 years. I believe that, and I'm seeing it. I'm actually seeing it. This kind of also gets to your point with, during COVID, uh, the exit out of California, Oregon, and Washington was massive. And we're in a small town. We're in a college town, 15,000, 20,000 people. Our church grew by about 400 people a year. 2020, 2021, 2022. We're at 7 church services now
Wow.
between my King's Cross and Christ Church. 7 church services. And so we're seeing just growth of ourselves. And so what happened was when President Trump retweeted my arrest, our show went viral. All these Christians that are sitting in these draconian liberal, not just cities, but states, started looking, and their churches were shutting down. Their pastors weren't standing up. Their pastors weren't teaching them how to think about the moment. They went to online church mode. They were getting no personal interaction. We did our first Fight Laugh Feast conference in October 2020, a month after I got arrested, and that's a whole other saga. We got kicked out of our building in Nashville, Tennessee, a month before our conference. I had 1,000 people coming to this conference.
Dude.
Because of COVID, we got kicked out of our building. I got arrested that next week. I'm trying to move 1,000 people to find another building, which I found a indoor soccer arena on green AstroTurf. That's where we ended up with our first conference because they're the only building that was big enough and that would allow us in
Wow.
Franklin, Tennessee. I had to find hotels, everything. So I got arrested while I'm trying to do all this. The next day after my arrest, I was on Glenn Beck, Laura Ingraham. I was basically in a media blitz from 6 a.m. till 8:30 at night the next day on Thursday.
Sure.
So my mom and my sister-in-law, they all stepped in and helped me move the conference. We had to find a stage, chairs. I mean, we went from scratch to do our first conference at the indoor green AstroTurf soccer field. And when I got there, I mean, that conference was so unique because we were the only Christian conference in person in the fall of 2020. All the other conferences are canceled. All the other Christian conferences are acquiesced. We get there, and all these people are like, "This is the first time I've worshipped with people in 6 months."
Wow.
It was like palpable. You could feel it. What God was like. People were tearing up. People were just so grateful to touch someone, hug someone. I mean, it was just so weird.
Yeah.
That the church had neglected the body of Christ to where our conference on a soccer field, green indoor arena in Franklin, Tennessee, became a source of encouragement for this. And so our community, our churches just blew up because God made the bar really low. Like for your church to grow in 2020, just remain open and don't require a mask and don't be woke.
Yeah,
That's
right.
it. The bar was so low, and all these churches started growing because they remained open and they didn't require a mask and they weren't woke, and it blew up. And so that happened to our community. Like I said, we're in seven services. So I have big hope for our city. That's why actually I started Patriots for Idaho. So I became a known political figure in Idaho and rest of the country and big pockets of the rest of the country. So I started Patriots for Idaho for that because I care. I mean, I love speaking in conferences in Florida, whatever. But I really care about Idaho,
Right.
Which is why I started Patriots for Idaho. And I hope by the grace of God over the next 40 years, we can make Idaho respect God's law, respect God's word, respect the Christian founding of our state and nation, and turn Idaho into a real beacon of light over these next 40 years. I'm 44, so 40 years, I'll be 84, and really fight the next 40 years to make Idaho a beacon of light, because we can. Because think about where Idaho's strategically placed. Roe v. Wade just got overturned. The state of Washington is 7 miles from my town. Watch Washington. Idaho basically made abortion illegal. We got a 6-week heartbeat ban. It's basically shut down all the clinics in Idaho. And then, so the state of Washington is 7 miles from us. Well, let them watch what a culture of death looks like over the next 40 years.
Right.
In Washington. And then contrast that to a culture of life that's going to be growing up in Idaho. The contrast that is now allowed under, now that Roe v. Wade's been overturned, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to really become a beacon of light, actually real light, a real example of what it means to be a faithful state, to be a state that loves life, loves children, all that stuff. And that's over the next 40 years. I'm very excited about what God can be doing, not only in my town, but just in Idaho. Long answer.
That's great. No, I'll make sure to direct people to Patriots for Idaho. This was great. I love your enthusiasm and passion for God's ways in the world, and especially for your local context. I can really tell you have a sincere heart when you say that, and I have a similar disposition when it's like my first ministry is here in my state, in my city, to my family. Right. So, Gabe, it was so much fun to have you on the show here. Story, thanks for coming on today.
Hey, Chase, thanks for having me, brother.
Hey, if you're a listener and you enjoyed this episode, I'd love if you share it with somebody. This was a great conversation, very, very provocative topic, not intentionally provocative, but just gets you thinking about the way you're obeying Christ in all of life. And so share this with somebody, give it a great rating, subscribe on YouTube. You can also sign up for the Patreon, keep supporting the show. It helps me keep bringing great content to you, and we'll see you next time.